Welcome to the Egill podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Egill Bjarnason. Egill is an Icelandic journalist based in Reykjavík. His work has appeared in the New York Times, National Geographic, Associated Press, and Al Jazeera, and many others. And today we will speak about his book, How Iceland Changed the World, the big story of a small Iceland. That's a big title.
Yeah, the opposite of humble, the title, but I figured I had to be bold to get to grab people's interest.
Well, you sure did, and I also like the graphic artist. The cover of the book is very nice, very. But okay, so I had to tell you, I went to Iceland about 3 years ago, and I fell in love with the landscape. It's the most beautiful landscape I have ever seen in my life. And the other thing that was weird to me is the 23-hour day instead of I was just going crazy at 3 o'clock in the morning and the sun was still on top of me. So my orientation was going a little bit crazy, but I enjoyed that trip so much. I would like to start by asking you a little bit about you, your background, how you got into journalism, and maybe a little bit of Iceland's background.
Yeah, you are right that it's really hard to get used to the 23-hour or 24-hour even. I'm in the north, so it's even an hour. The days are an hour longer here in the north of Iceland than they are in Reykjavik, and just the body isn't on your mind isn't really tuned into that, so it's always a surprise. But I wrote this book after being a reporter for some years, and mostly reporting on Iceland for the international media, like you mentioned. And when I began that work, I realized there were so many stories about Iceland that hadn't been told before. That we have not had the tradition of having international reporters here on the ground. And before the days of the internet, stories wouldn't really travel as they did today. So I found that I was in kind of a luxury that I could explore a lot of topics that hadn't been done before, and began thinking about Iceland and coverage of Iceland as a kind of maybe just a global competition for good stories. I mean, if it's a good story, people are going to like it, even though it comes from a kind of an irrelevant place like Iceland. So the ultimate story that I, of course, want to tell was the history of Iceland, because it has this kind of natural beginning where you could tell the history of Iceland from day one, so to speak, because we have stories about our settlers who arrived around 1150 years ago to this empty island in the North Atlantic, and no other European nation can kind of tell its story from the beginning like that. So that has always been compelling to me, and I wanted a way to tell that story, and that's how I kind of came up with this angle of connecting it to famous world events or contributions to the outside world, to make it relevant to people that don't have the same stakes in Iceland history as me as a native or other Icelanders do.
And can you explain why is it that only Iceland can tell the story from day one as opposed to all the European nations?
Yeah, I mean, so Iceland, it was before it was settled. This was an island with the same landscape you've seen, maybe changed a little bit by volcanoes, but there were a few foxes here and lots of birds, but no one else. And so Northern Europeans, the Vikings, as we sometimes refer to them, but it was a little bit more complex than that. There were people from England as well, slaves and wives and all that, and they figured out a way to get here. And of course, as we know, Europe Europe has been settled for thousands and thousands of years, and no one really knows who was the which tribe was first to kind of roam into Europe. But because Iceland is so late in time, we can that almost overlaps with the arrival of the written word, and therefore we know the names of the first people who came, and they came because they had the sailing technique to get here.
And I heard that Icelandics are very serious about documenting the heritage. So you can go back in history and see who your grandparents and great grandparents and all these were in history.
Yeah,
You guys are very meticulous about your record keeping.
absolutely. We we are. It's I mean, part of it is because we are kind of a very small island. We are really obsessed with how we are related, and we are all related. The Icelandic population is only 350,000 people, and it's only I think I am the 36th generation of Icelanders. So you can kind of trace your heritage back to everyone. It's all been documented, and there's even a genealogical database. A database was designed for other purposes than just the fun of seeing, who we related to. It was designed to track genetic diseases, but it also has this sort of it also has this use that I could type in the name of Björn, just to name the most famous Icelander, and see how far we are related. We are not related much. I've done this, but we have a common ancestor somewhere in the 18th century.
So I guess when you open the phone book, and the time there were used to be phone books, there
Yeah.
were not that many different last names, were they? Since you are all related.
Yeah, but it might be that way if we had we don't have last names. We still have that patronymic system where you take up the family name. You don't take up a family name. You take up the last name of your. You take up a name that is the name of your father. So I am the son of Bjarni. My father's name is Bjarni. And so I am Bjarnason, meaning son of Bjarni. So my father, he has a different last name, which is Harðarson, and that simply means the son of Hörður, which is my grandfather. So that's still the tradition. So that does make it seem more diverse than it is. You're right about that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So okay. You speak very good English. I heard that Icelandic people speak very several languages. Can you tell us, if I'm in high school in Iceland, how many languages do I have access to learn?
If you were in school today, you would learn English from the age of 11 or 12, once a week. But if you were in school, when I was in school, you'd start by learning Danish, because we were part of Denmark, and there's this sort of Scandinavian bond that ties us to the other Scandinavian countries. That means that there's been a push to teach Danish, but that's kind of changed a bit. So English is really dominant in curriculum, and then also in Icelandic life. Because we're a small nation, we're not sustainable when it maybe comes to if we say entertainment or even education, and all of that. We need to rely on other sources, and we don't have the money to translate everything and so forth. So you kind of learn English by default by just watching TV, and when you're in university you have to read books that are in English, and that would explain mostly why Icelandic population is relatively good in English, but there are also of course other factors like tourism is a big industry, and the population is getting more diverse. We have a very big migrant population, and that's all in English. So yeah, English is there's always this conflict with kind of English and Icelandic. It sometimes feels like it's gradually taking over.
But in spite of English slowly taking over, I know that the Icelandic government makes a lot of effort to preserve the Icelandic language. Can you share some of those efforts?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And like I said before, we rely a lot on English entertainment, but we also make a lot of our own. We publish a lot of books, and we make a lot of films, and none of that would be possible without government subsidizing these industries. The government runs a scheme. If you're a writer or an artist, you can apply for funding. You get kind of a stipend for sometimes the more successful ones get almost paid monthly wages, but others get more in a grant form. And all of that does make it easier to live, or making art in whatever form in Iceland, because it's not just a small language, it's also a small market. So the rules of the royalties and all that, they don't necessarily apply, and that's why the government kind of steps in.
Well, for a small island with 350,000 people, I get the impression that the Icelandic government is very generous. You are like the golden standard of many civilizations. You have universal healthcare, you have free education, not only primary, secondary, but tertiary education, which is amazing. I mean, people in the United States will queue just to go to college, and they do queue to go to college, and you guys got that all for free. What else? What other help do regular citizens get from the government?
COVID has I guess shown people the benefit of our welfare system. A lot of people that probably didn't think they ever needed to go on benefits have had to, and you're right. We pay high taxes, but we're also lucky. We are a small population with a lot of resources. So we sometimes pat ourselves on the back and we think, look how great we are, but we're also just lucky that we have all this fish in the sea that we have exclusive access to, and we can sell abroad. We have geothermal heat in the ground that we can use to power big factories, and we have big rivers to make more electricity than we need for. So all that kind of is divided by a relatively small population, and with that you can of course, with good governance, you can put that money where it's needed.
Yeah, I guess that's the key word, good government, because there are many other nations around the world that are blessed with natural resources. Like there are many oil nations that are just full with corruption, and the money goes to a few corrupt politicians. So I guess you guys have like a most honest government, I would say, and that's that's the secret of more equal civilization. I guess I would say it that way.
Mm. I think that that's absolutely right. There's no, it can even be a curse to have these natural resources. But in our case, we have this long tradition of being kind of an equal society. It's been, part of it is the reason that it's been always been hard to become really rich in Iceland. Before the time, before really, I mean, industrial revolution came here really late, and before that, it was mostly just farming, and you can't really become like a super rich person doing that. And so we just have this sort of long, it's part of our history to be all equally poor or equally rich.
But I saw a movie that was about the 2008 financial crisis,
Mm.
and they portray Iceland as this all of a sudden international bankers who didn't have any experience in the international mm, uh, markets. And then, well, of course, everyone fell in this 2008 financial crisis, but Iceland was like one of those countries who people couldn't understand. Okay, how does this little country who relies in fish all of a sudden are the epicenter of international finance?
Yeah, it's a really strange period in Iceland's history. How we got, we became this sort of international experiment for for finance, and then we became the symbol of the financial crisis, and part of that enormous collapse that we experienced, was the fact that the Icelandic banks and the financial sector, it was owned by the government until the late 20th century. So the industry was very young, and as you point out, some of the bankers, they had been, they just worked in fish factories as as young men, and they were really bold. They thought they wanted to conquer the world really quickly, and so when when they hit hard times, with the strapped borrowing around the globe, when everything cooled down in 2008, the Icelandic banks were kind of the first to collapse, and then that was a enormous shock for the country, because people believed in this new future.
Okay, so I have one more question about
Yeah.
Iceland before going into the topic of your book. The
Mm-hmm.
question is around tourism. So after the financial crisis, the new economy became tourism. And when I got there, well, I was super happy to have all these services available to me. But at the same time, I noticed that downtown Reykjavík was full of Airbnbs, and that many
Yeah.
people there were not happy because they were being displaced by the tourism. And now I guess with COVID, that part of the economy has been suffering as well. But what can you tell us about the tourism industry in Iceland?
It's grown a lot in the past couple of years. Iceland wasn't really an acknowledged tourist destination 10 years ago. I mean, there were hotels, of course, but it was nothing compared to what is now. And of course, by COVID, we're still not back to our previous numbers. But it seems like it's going to get there. But of course, it's had a lot of growth pain, because it's gone. It's grown by 20% every year almost. And you mentioned the Airbnbs, which kind of came around around the same time as Iceland's tourism was taking off, and I don't think Iceland would have able to accommodate all these new people. You can't build it takes years to draft and build the hotel. So if you with Airbnb, you could put to use a lot of available space and host more people, because these you need that's what you need to bring in tourists. You need to be able to sell them a place to stay.
Okay, so now let's go into the topic of your book. What was the inspiration? I mean, you are, of course, you are inspired by your own government to write books. Almost everyone in Iceland is an author, but but you, what make you said, okay, now is my time to grab my pen and write the history of this huge, small island that have changed the world?
Well, like I said, I've always been tempted to tell the Iceland's history because it's a natural narrative. It goes from day one, and that was the main reason I started thinking about it. I thought I started thinking about how can I tell this history of Iceland, and it probably helped that I'd worked for the Associated Press for some time, and I'd help update their obituary archive. They have this archive about mostly famous people that have pre-written obituaries, and I had looked around about who could we portray in Iceland. And when you look around for these obituaries, you take the famous people, you take the famous politicians, but you also take these people that have had just some impact on how history has played out. So in the book, for instance, I talk about this policeman, local policeman, who was the bodyguard of Bobby Fischer, the famous chess genius, who came to Iceland initially to play this really iconic match with the Russians in the Cold War, and then became a fugitive and returned to Iceland and all that. And this policeman, just a kind of a normal guy, still alive, he played a big role in this fateful event. So that's that. Starting to think about and look around for characters like that. That drove me into the writing. Yeah.
Wow. The last chapter of your book is about gender equality, and of course, the Prime Minister of Iceland happens to be a woman as well. And Iceland is, I think, one of the leaders in the world also in gender equality. What can you share with us that we are still give I don't know, priority to men in almost every industry, and here in Canada, US, and every other country, men earn more than women? How is gender and income, for example, in Iceland?
A lot has changed just in the past 10 years. I think we have now the highest labor participation of women in the world. And we also have a really high fertility rate, which means that Icelandic women have more babies than European women on average.
What's the fertility rate? Do you know off the top of your head?
It's around 2.2, so
Wow.
It's just above replacement. But I think that's the kind of the balancing act that we have been able to achieve, because it's one thing to just have men and women work equally, but to have it kind of work out as a good family structure has been crucial, and that's where the kind of government, I think, has played a big role with their paternity and maternity schemes and good daycare and all of that. And a lot of our policies aim to make it, aim to make work and business life more family friendly in some ways. So and I think that's one aspect of our gender equality. Another, of course, would be the influence of women in politics, in parliament, and all that. And you can kind of trace that back to the first female president who was elected in 1980, and was a trailblazer.
That's funny about the fertility rates because one time I thought I saw some uh, interesting advertisement of the Icelandic government trying to encourage women to have more kids. So I thought that still the fertility rate was below two. Below
Yeah, I
two.
think I think it's been around. It's declining.
Okay.
Like everywhere, it is declining. So I'm sure the government is trying to every government wants to keep its population young or younger. So I'm sure there's been some push to get people to have babies. Yeah.
Okay, so one last question about your book. Can you tell the listeners what was the great important role that the Icelandic government had or the Icelandic people had on the French Revolution?
Yeah. Well, this is the story that we love to tell people, that we are responsible for the French Revolution, and particularly this volcano that's in the middle of Iceland. It's a big volcanic craters that last erupted 6 years before the French Revolution. And this eruption was like a 1 in 1,000 years super eruption. It was enormous fires and enormous ash that clouded not just Iceland, but it brought mist all over the northern Europe and altered the sunlight and all and the wind patterns and the Gulf Stream and all that. Just kind of changed the atmosphere on the planet for several years. And the first year was, of course, the most dramatic. It started, winter just kind of arrived in Europe in mid-July, and it was like a climate apocalypse. But what this did was it brought crop harvests for the people of France, and as we know from that famous quote, "Let them eat cake," that was what fueled the revolution. But of course, the ideas about democracy and all that had come from the French philosophers. But without the volcano, it may have not happened at this time in history. And history is all about this sort of, you have these windows to make change,
Right.
and the volcano just kind of pushed the France over that part. Yeah.
Okay, one last question. So we opened the podcast mentioning that you have now a 24-hour daylight. How do
Yeah.
you survive with 24 hours without of night? And how long does that goes for? What, a couple of months without sunlight?
It's that days are getting shorter now. But the other day, it was a very sunny day. I watched it. I was watching the sunset around 1 a.m. and it just kind of bounces on the horizon. You know, it just kind of goes down and then up again. It's like a ping pong ball. But this period it's fading into dark. So by the end of July, you'll have dark again around midnight, and then the days get really they shorten very fast in September and October. So it's a cycle that it's part of life here, and it always has some effect on you. Yeah, for sure. One part is just getting enough sleep in the summer, and it's important to have good blinds or cover your eyes in some ways. It's Otherwise, you won't get enough sleep. In my experience.
But don't you get depressed with 24 hours of darkness during the winter?
Well, no, and it's not that extreme, but sure, it can be. It can be it can be hard when you arrive to work in pitch black, and you leave work in pitch black, and so I'm a freelancer, so I try to be outside in those 4 or 5 hours of daylight that we have in the winter, but it's hard for sure. Yeah.
Well, Egill, you convinced me of how Iceland changed the world. Can you tell our listeners one more time the title of the book and where they can follow your work?
Absolutely. The book is called How Iceland Changed the World: The Big History of a Small Island, and it can be found where books are sold. And I am not the best person on social media, but I'm on Instagram called Egill's Saga, and on Twitter as well. And I'm also trying to be more on Goodreads.
Okay, great. Well, Egill, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been great.